Let me begin by stating flat out that there is no single correct left hand position. The position of the left hand isn't static but dynamic. In other words, it's always changing. You have to play countless chord shapes, many with wide reaches across the width and length of the fretboard. Changes into and out of these positions require the hand to be in constant flux. The hand must respond to the music. Now, having said that, though, let me go through the conventional advice on finding the correct or home or default left-hand position. But I'm telling you now, I seriously question the wisdom of teaching this to a beginning student, and I'll tell you why a little later. There are two left-hand positions, two extreme positions. One is what I call the slanted hand position. It looks like this. This one's fairly easy to find. It's also relatively comfortable. And it's the position used to play most of the basic chords in first position. D chords, A chords, A major, a seventh, G chord. So if you go from a basic G chord to putting all four fingers down on the first string, or a D chord and come back to the first string, that's your position. You'll notice my hand doesn't change position at all, going from that D chord to the four fingers planted, one to a fret on the first string. That is the slanted hand position. So that's what works, again, for most of your basic chords in first position. And a lot of guitar music, classical guitar music, is based on those simple chords in first position. So that's your slanted hand position. And then the other position is what most teachers, books, and videos describe as the correct or default hand position or home hand position. It looks like this. I call it the parallel hand position because the hand is kept parallel with the neck here, like that. It's not turned out like on the slanted hand position. It's parallel with the neck, and the fingers are kept parallel with the frets. If you draw a line from knuckle to knuckle, that line lines up parallel with the frets, like that. And now my first finger is leaning to its left, my little fingers leaning to the right. But the second and third fingers are parallel with the frets and standing vertically, perpendicularly onto the fretboard. And I'll explain this in more detail in a little bit and show you some different camera angles. But again, those are your two basic positions. The slanted position like this and the parallel position like this. And you'll use those two positions and everything in between those two extremes. And sometimes you'll actually go past parallel. In other words, your little finger side of the hand will actually go into the neck a little bit extra for some formations. That's not real common, but that does happen. So you have this wide range of positioning of your left hand, as you can see. And you'll use them all. You're not going to be stuck with just one hand position. Okay, we're going to look at the parallel position in detail. Couple basic things. The wrist should be fairly flat here. And notice I'm not arched out like this. It's flat. And that's true if I were up here at the 5th fret, same thing. The wrist is flat like that. It's not arched out. And also it doesn't go sink in that way either. It doesn't cave in like that. It's pretty straight. And it's also straight with the arm. I don't turn it that way or that way. Either way. It's just straight. Now, it's probably easiest to find this position, get used to it, trying it at with the first finger at the 5th fret or even at the 7th fret because the frets are closer together there. So you might try that first. Now, there's several ways to try to find this position or teach it to someone. In fact, I've got 5 different ways to do it, so let me show you those. Here is method 1 of finding the left hand position, the parallel hand position. At the 5th fret, put your first finger, lay it, don't press, just lay it across the fret on the fretboard, parallel with the fret. Lay the 2nd finger at the next fret, the 6th fret, 3rd finger at the 7th fret, little finger at the 8th fret. It doesn't matter if they reach all the way across the frets or not. And don't try to get the little finger to go all the way across. Just set the fingers on the strings, parallel with the frets. In other words, lined up with the frets. You know, if you're teaching beginners or young people, be careful about using words like parallel because they don't understand it. They haven't been taught in school what the word means. So you have to explain lined up with the frets. And explain that to them, show them. So anyway, you just set all 4 fingers on the fretboard, not pressing down, just lightly on the strings, but make sure they're parallel with the frets, lined up with the frets. Okay, so here you are. Your fingers are at the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th frets, just lightly on the strings, parallel with the frets, lined up with the frets. Thumb's right here, actually. And then just bring the thumb underneath the neck, put it in between the 1st and 2nd fingers like that. So you don't change anything else. Keep those fingers parallel with the frets. Bring your thumb underneath between the 1st and 2nd fingers. And then just curl the fingers up and put them on the 3rd string, and you'll be in a good parallel hand position. So again, you're setting the fingers on the strings, lined up with the frets. Thumb is back behind, it's on the back of the neck between the 1st and 2nd fingers. Curl the fingers, place them on the 3rd string, and you're there. If that didn't work, method 2 is very similar. For method 2, what you do, you grab the neck like this. Just wrap your entire hand around the neck where your first finger is at the 5th fret. Make sure your elbow's just hanging loose. Just grab the neck, hand just flat on there. And then just bring your hand down, bringing the fingers on again to the 3rd string is probably best. And that should put you in a parallel hand position. Once again, notice my wrist is flat, not like this and not like that, not like that. So again, just grip the entire neck, wrap your thumb around it behind there, like that. Just grip the neck at the 5th fret, first finger at the 5th fret, elbow hanging, and then come onto the 3rd string, 1 finger to a fret. Now, if that didn't work, try method number 3. Set the 2nd finger on the 1st string at the 6th fret, 3rd finger at the 7th fret, little finger at the 8th fret. You can press on the string or just lightly rest the fingers on the strings. And then, probably when you do that, or if you're teaching someone to do this, they'll probably, use a very relaxed position here and not be parallel with the neck, but that's okay. Have them then put the first finger on the 1st string at the 5th fret. Okay, so 2nd, 3rd, 4th, then the 1st finger on the 1st string at the 5th fret. And then tell them to take that 1st finger and lay it across the entire fret, not pressing, we're not doing a bar chord here, but just lay it across the fretboard, across all 6 strings. But, and they'll tend to do it crooked like this. Tell them, well, no, we need to put it parallel, lined up with the fret. And what that'll do, it'll straighten out this slanted position into the parallel position, and they'll have it. Now, when they do that, they may try to do contortions of lifting the elbow out and stuff like that. So you may have to hold their elbow, make sure that you explain, the elbow hangs here, and hold their elbow. So when they try to do the finger extended across all 6 strings, that they don't change the elbow position. And that will straighten out the position so that the hand is now in the parallel position. When they put that finger across all 6 strings, we may get a little bit of wrist arch, but it won't be excessive. It'll be okay. And when they go back to the first finger on the first string, you can have them flatten it out a little bit to explain, to keep that flat. And the thumb, it's very possible when they do this that their thumb will be way off to the left like this. And if that's the case, and even when they put the bar down, a parallel bar, that thumb it's possible to hold the thumb out to the left like this, and some people will. So you simply have to explain to bring that thumb opposite between the first finger and the second finger. And then that'll take care of that. So give that a try. Method 4, and I'm just showing you this from this angle. You don't sit like this. But the method 4, you make a fist, and you make sure that the wrist is straight. Don't make a fist and bend the wrist. Keep it flat, straight. Okay? All right. So, shake out your hand, make a fist, bring it close to the neck so that you're parallel with the neck, but don't actually set the hand on the neck. Just, line up your fist with the neck, come away just a little bit, and then open up the hand. Thumb will go behind the neck, and then simply bring your fingers onto the first string. And they'll be fairly close together. Just spread them apart until each one is close to a fret. Now, don't try to force the hand. If the fingers don't reach the frets, don't worry about it. Place them as close to the frets as they'll go without straining, and stretching exercises can come later. And then the thumb, move it so that it's opposite in between the first and second fingers. And there's your parallel hand position. So once again, make a fist with a straight wrist. All right, bring that close to the neck, parallel with the neck. Open up the hand, thumb goes behind the neck. Place the fingers lightly on the first string. And then spread them apart, one finger to a fret, and bring your thumb across opposite the first and second fingers. Finally, method number 5, let your left arm fall down towards the floor, totally loose. Shake it out. Then turn the palm forward towards the front. Bend at the elbow. Bring the hand up to the guitar. Bring the fingers onto the first string at the 5th fret. Then your thumb, bring it behind the neck so it's opposite in between the first and second fingers. Then spread the fingers so one finger is at a fret. Don't force it. If they don't reach all the way, don't worry about it. And there you are. You're in a parallel hand position. So once again, let the arm hang loosely. Shake it out. Turn, rotate so that the palm is now facing front. Bend at the elbow, only at the elbow. Bring the fingers onto the first string, first finger at the 5th fret. Take your thumb, Put it behind the neck, in between the first and second fingers. And then spread the fingers out, one finger to a fret, and you're there. Now let's review a few of the finer points of the parallel hand position. Once again, the hand is parallel with the neck, which makes the second and third fingers parallel with the frets. They're not turned like this. They're parallel with the frets. First finger leans on its left side, leans to your left. The little finger is on its right side of the tip and leaning to the right. If you straighten out your fingers away from the guitar and then curl them, you can see that the first and fourth fingers splay apart from each other. They lean away from each other. And that's why when you put the hand in the parallel position, the same thing happens. The first finger leans a little to its left, or quite a bit to its left. The little finger leans to the right, where again, second and third fingers stand perpendicularly to the frets and they're parallel with the frets. And just so you know, in the lower positions where the frets are further apart from each other, that first finger will lean quite far on its left side for most people. As you shift up the neck, slide up on a string, you'll notice that your first finger straightens out a bit. It doesn't lean as much to the left. It wants to go more vertical. And that's normal because the frets are getting closer together. As they get closer together, that first finger, instead of leaning to the left, will assume a little more vertical position, and that's fine. Here's another view of the difference between the parallel position and the slanted hand position. In the slanted hand position, this part of my hand swings away from the neck like that. Parallel position, this part of the hand swings in closer to the neck, which makes the hand go parallel. Swung out, parallel. Now also, notice what happens with the little finger here, with this joint in particular, well, both joints. When I swing out in the slanted position, the little finger flattens, it straightens out like that. When I go parallel, it makes the joints of the little finger bend. And that's one of the advantages of the parallel position, is that it keeps the joints of all the fingers bent, and when they're bent, they're strongest. When you swing away and flatten out, straighten out that little finger, it weakens the little finger tremendously. It puts the little finger at a disadvantage. So in passages where the little finger plays a significant role, you probably want to make sure you're in the more parallel position to help it out. You'll also notice if I were playing on, say, the third string with the parallel position, I have clearance of the second string behind my fingers. If I do the slanted position, swing away from the neck, then that little finger is going to be touching the second string. I wouldn't be able to play the second string at the same time. It would clunk. So that's another advantage of the parallel position, is that it gives you better clearance of the strings behind the strings you're holding down. And once again, you see how the little finger flattens out too in the slanted position. And most of the time, it's pretty important that the fingers land perpendicularly onto the strings rather than from an angle from the side like this, which means playing on the very tips of the fingers too. And the reason for that is in classical playing, a lot of the time we're playing, fretting a note, and we have to play, if I can get a good angle here, the open strings around that note we're holding. And if I'm leaning over, then of course I'm going to touch that adjacent string, clunk it. So perpendicular placement is important, and to be on the very tips of your fingers most of the time as well. There are many instances where you intentionally put a finger down at an angle like this for the express purpose of damping an adjacent string. But your default position should be more of a perpendicular placement like that. And the parallel hand position facilitates that. When you swing away on the slanted position, that tends to make the fingers lean over. They rotate and then lean into the next string, which can be a problem. So once again, the parallel position has a lot of advantages to it over the slanted position. This is not a big deal, but I should probably mention it, that when you move from, say, the first string to the sixth string, as you're going from string to string, your position will change a little bit in regard to the amount of curvature in the fingers and where your hand is against the neck or on the neck here. If you're on the first string, you have a lot of bend in the tip joints, and the hand is just a little bit away from the neck. As you go towards the bases, your hand is going to, of course, come closer to the neck, and your fingers will be a little bit more, assume a more rounded shape. They won't be as acutely bent at each joint as they are on the first string. They'll be a little more rounded. And assuming you're not having to play the first string, you can actually let your hand rest on the neck when you're playing the sixth string. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Of course, if you have to play the first string at the same time, then you raise up just enough to clear that first string. Don't arch way out, of course. So there is a slight difference in the shape of the fingers as you go from string to string. But that doesn't change the being parallel with the neck in the parallel hand position. And when moving from the first string to the sixth string, or moving from string to string, the wrist position does change too. On the first, if you're playing on the first string, second string, your wrist is going to be pretty flat. But as you go to the bases, you're going to arch a little bit to reach the bass strings. Not like this, but just a small amount, and you'll find it. It's a very natural thing. Just let it happen. Don't be alarmed if you see a little bit of arch in that wrist when you're playing on the bass strings. Again, the hand position is a constantly changing position. It's never the same. The idea of keeping the wrist flat or straight is important because if you don't do that, if you arch the wrist out, the fingers lean forward like that, which can cause you to bend the strings down like this. I see this all the time in difficult formations. The student will struggle and they start, from tension, they start to arch out their wrist, and then they pull the string down, pulling it out of tune, actually, affecting their intonation. So make sure that wrist is flat behind there, not arched out, but straight. Now also in regard to the wrist position, sitting position is important. Now, you can be in a good sitting position and still arch out your wrists incorrectly, but if you're in a bad sitting position, it's definitely going to exacerbate wrist problems. Because if you lean the guitar back or you lean back in your chair too much, it's going to tend to add bend to that wrist. You're going to tend to arch it out. So make sure you check out your sitting position, that you don't have the guitar leaning back too far, that it's sitting squarely on your leg, and that you're sitting up straight as well. Don't lean back. That'll help you keep your wrists straight. Now, another thing about your hand position is the web between your fingers here should be, if you lay a pencil across there, it should be even with the plane of the fingerboard. In other words, that pencil should be lying flat on the fingerboard. You don't want to arch up your hand up high, which raises the center of gravity of your hand. You want to keep your hand on the low side. So again, the pencil trick can test that for you. Now there are exceptions, but for the most part, that web, if you get up too high, you're arching up too much, your center of gravity is off. So lay the pencil on the web, lower your hand until the pencil sits flat on the fretboard, and that's going to put you in a pretty good position. So keep an eye on that, because other things can be okay, but if that's arched up a little too much, the center of gravity is a little too high, it can cause you problems. Another thing to check is to be sure your second and third fingers are standing perpendicularly to the strings, to the fretboard. Don't let the fingers lean to the left. You can actually be in a parallel hand position, correct position, and your fingers, because of weaknesses in the joints, can lean to the left like that. You don't want that. You want the second and third fingers, the two middle fingers there, to stand perpendicularly to the fretboard. Then you also have some other basic things. Make sure you keep your fingers close to the frets. The further away you are from the fret, the harder it is to press the string down. And some say the note doesn't sustain as long if you're away from the fret. So always very close to the frets, not on top, but right behind the frets. And press just hard enough to get the tone to come out. Don't press too hard. Now, one more thing about the left elbow position. Most of the time, the elbow hangs loosely, very comfortably, very relaxed. Some teachers, though, say that when you play it in first position, the elbow should be out a little bit rather than hanging loosely. You can try both ways, see what works best for you. But definitely, as you approach the higher positions, the upper positions, the elbow should hang very loosely, just hanging down. The thumb is the balance point for the rest of the hand. And like the hand itself, its position will change constantly with the requirements of the music. Here you see a view of it. I'm in my parallel hand position, and notice my thumb is in between the in between the first and second fingers. Now again, depending on what you're playing, there's leeway here on where that's going to be along the length of the neck. But in general, you don't want it off to the left of the index finger like that. That's a no-no. And you probably won't want to put it up here just because it contributes to a lot of tension in the forearm if you do that. So some people prefer it's a little closer to the index finger. Some people go a little closer to the middle finger, to the second finger, like this. And part of it, too, depends on finger lengths and the relative length of the thumb to the length of the other fingers. But somewhere in this range is where you want your thumb to be most of the time. It's going to be on the parallel position, the thumb's going to be resting on its left side. On the slanted position, it's going to be more to the right, and it's going to be resting more flat on the neck like this rather than angled on the left side like that for the parallel position. Okay? And we'll look at that in a little while when we talk more about the slanted hand position. But for the parallel position, it's going to look like this. And for either position, usually your thumb will be locked, well, especially for the parallel position, your thumb will be locked into place like this. It won't bend at the tip joint. Not like this, and not wobbly like this. It'll usually stay flat and locked like that. In the parallel hand position, as you're changing strings, the position of the thumb will change as well. If I start out on the 6th string, I go to the fifth string, my thumb changes. Fourth string, a slight change. Third string, a slight change. Second string, a slight change. First string, a slight change. So that thumb has walked from here all the way to here. Get it from here. So sixth string, parallel position, all the way to the first string, parallel position. Once again, the point is the thumb doesn't stay in one spot. It's constantly changing position with the requirements of the music. Another thing to keep in mind is the spacing between the thumb and the inner part of the index finger, that there is always space here. You don't grab the neck, hug the neck here anywhere, so that you're like this. Always space in between there, like that. And that goes for regardless of what string you're playing. If you're playing the first string or the sixth string, the angle between that thumb and index finger pretty well stays constant in the parallel hand position. In the slanted hand position, it's a slightly different angle, but there's still the space there. We're not doing this. There's always that space. Okay. The thumb should be a passive participant. It exerts minimal pressure on the neck most of the time. Don't use a vice grip between that thumb and the fingers. You don't have to rely on squeezing between the thumb and fingers. Instead, use the force of gravity. For many left-hand situations, little effort is required to play the notes if you let the fingers sink into the strings next to the frets, using the weight of the left arm as the primary pressure source. Instead of squeezing out the notes by pinching between the thumb and the fingers, hang on the strings. You'll get clear notes with far less effort. So what we're talking about, actually two things. The weight of the arm is the downward weight of that forearm, like this. So if you put your fingers in fifth position, first finger, first at the fifth fret, second finger, third finger, fourth finger, like that. And if you take your thumb off the neck, and then just allow the weight of your arm to hold the string down, sort of relax your biceps, you'll find that you actually pull the string down like this. You see that? Let me give you a close-up. So here it is. I'm using the weight of the arm. Thumb is off the neck. I've got my four fingers on the string, third string in fifth position. I'm just using the weight of the arm to hold the strings down, and as you see, it's pulling the string, stretching the string down towards the floor because of the weight of the arm. Now in reality, not only are you using the downward weight of the arm, the forearm, but also there's this movement here, this rocking movement of the forearm, the elbow, well, the entire arm like that. So in real life, if you use just the weight of the forearm, then you'd end up pulling the string down, stretching it out of tune all the time, okay? So what you do, you use the weight of the arm, the downward motion, plus the rocking back force, and use that to hold, those two, to hold the strings down. Again, you can do this without the thumb on the neck. Wiggle your thumb around, make sure it's relaxed, and then hold the strings. Just hang on the string. You're not squeezing with the thumb and the fingers any longer without your thumb on the neck. You're just hanging on that string. You can try with an E major chord too. That gives you a good feel for it. Take your thumb off the neck and just hang on the chord, hang on the strings like that. Feel that elbow and the weight of the arm holding the chord down. Then when you play for real, not only do then you've got the arm weight and the rocking motion going, and then you take your thumb and place it on the back of the neck where it belongs, lightly, again as a passive participant, and you're ready to roll. I mean, you're going to be able to play without getting fatigue in these muscles here between your thumb and your index finger. You'll have far greater strength because the weight of your arm and the strength of your arm muscles, which we'll talk about in a second, far exceed the strength of that muscle between the thumb and the index finger. So it will really help you play with far less effort. Now on difficult chords, if you're holding some bar chords like a D flat chord, bar chord, and I've talked about this in my videos on playing bars, not only do you use the weight and the rocking motion of the left arm, but you also use your right arm as well, and you pull with both arms. You get the rocking motion of the left arm pulling back, and you counter that with the right arm, because otherwise if you'd use just the left arm and tried to use that force, your guitar, you would pull it out of position. The guitar would be moving on you. So you counter the force of this, the left arm, with the right arm pulling back as well. So you're pulling the guitar against your chest with both arms to hold the big bar chord. And again, the thumb, even in this, it's a passive participant. 90% of the strength I'm using to play this chord is coming from my arms, not from the little muscle, here. That'll get fatigued very quickly. You probably also won't be able to play this clearly either if you just depend on that thumb muscle. In fact, I can play the D flat chord without my thumb on the neck at all, using arm strength entirely. Or just a plain old F major chord or a G chord. Take your thumb off the neck, wiggle it around, make sure it's loose, and use your arm strength. Pull with your arms to hold that chord. Use your arm weight to add strength to the hand. Don't depend on the thumb. Again, the thumb is a passive participant, even in difficult bar chords. Again, I want to emphasize there are always exceptions to the rules of left-hand positioning. It's always going to change according to the demands of the music. If you place a simple, well, it's not simple, but an F-sharp 7 chord, like this, the little finger on the 7th. If you look at my wrist from the side, look at that, I'm breaking that rule of keeping a flat wrist, a straight wrist. You can't play this chord without arching the wrist out. It's just the way it is. So again, that's an example of the music dictating the hand position. Here's another example of the wide range of positions required by the music. Here's a simple A major chord. If I play a G flat major 7 chord, look at that. Entirely different hand position. Both are correct according to the needs of their particular situation. The A chord, I'm in my slanted position. I'm swinging out from the neck. My elbow is winged out slightly. Instead of hanging down loosely, it's winged out to the left. When I go to the G flat major 7 chord, that elbow comes in. The hand turns in. And I'm actually past the parallel position. My little finger side of the hand is closer to the neck than my first finger side of the hand. Parallel would be a little bit more like this, and I can play the chord in the parallel position, but it's a bit of a strain on the hand. Going into the neck a little bit more gives me a little bit. It adds to the advantage of the little finger. It helps the little finger out when I turn the hand in closer. Gives the little finger more strength. So that's a pretty dramatic example of two very different hand positions. Both are correct for their situation. Earlier I talked about the slanted hand position. A few more points about that. As I mentioned, it's the common position used to play a lot of the basic chords, folk guitar chords or cowboy chords in first position. And what happens, the determining factor, or one of the determining factors of when you use your slanted hand position, is whenever you have two fingers at the same fret, that's when you turn out and use the slanted hand position. And a lot of the basic chords fit that situation. A chord, you've got two fingers at the same fret. Actually, you got three fingers at the same fret. Regardless of how you finger it, you're going to have two fingers at the same fret. A D chord, you've got two fingers at the same fret, slanted position. B7th, you've got a bunch of three fingers at the same fret, slanted position. E major, two fingers at the same fret, slanted position. E minor, two fingers at the same fret, slanted position. So again, a lot of your bass and your G chord, two fingers at the same position or same fret, regardless of what your fingering is. So those chords require two fingers at the same fret. That means you're going to turn out slanted hand position. Now, you can play a D chord in a parallel hand position. Can be done, but what it does, it forces the finger on the lower pitched string down into the fret, and in some situations can contribute to buzzing because you're not close enough to the fret. For a B7th chord, again, I can do parallel position, but it's very uncomfortable. Does not feel good at all. There's no reason to do that, to try and do parallel position for that. Okay, now, but that parallel position is not just for first position. Anytime, any situation where you have two fingers at the same fret, doesn't matter what pair of strings you're on, it doesn't matter where you are on the neck, anytime you have two fingers at the same fret, you're going to use the swung out slanted hand position. Most of the time. There are some passages where it would be inconvenient to suddenly switch from, say, if you were in a parallel position, to switch to the slanted position if it's a very fast passage. I mean, again, there's so many different situations, different formations, tempos, all kinds of things you have to consider that it's hard to make rules about this stuff. But I will say, in general, 95% of the time, if you have two fingers at the same fret, you're going to need to, you'll feel more comfortable using the slanted hand position. You'll do better. Now here I am in my slanted hand position, and as you can see, the thumb is a little bit more, it's flat, positioned flat like this, and it's a little more to the right, more opposite the second finger than in between the first finger and second finger. And sometimes when you're doing the slanted position, the thumb it will go a little higher even, not all the way to the third finger, but a little past the second finger on its positioning, like that, rather than being in between the first and second fingers as it was in the parallel position. But again, the position of the thumb, it's a constantly changing thing. And for a lot of the simple folk chords, like your D major chord, the thumb's going to come around the neck a little bit more than it would, and if you're playing on the first string in a parallel position, your thumb's going to be pretty far under the neck, like that. But for a D chord, it's going to come around quite a bit, like that. For an A chord, major chord, fingered 1, 2, 3, look what happens there. The thumb goes the opposite direction. Points off to the right rather than in the parallel position playing on the first string where it's leaning on the left and pointing off to the left like that. For an A chord, it looks quite different. So a lot of the folk guitar chords, here's a C chord, It's going to look like that. E chord, look at that, comes around there a little bit more. Of course, a bar chord, that's going to resemble more of the parallel positioning of the thumb. G chord, look at that, goes that way and fairly flat on the guitar and fairly straight. It no longer has this locked position because it's coming around the neck this way. So it's the joint here is a straighter joint. It's not that locked backwards formation that you saw in the parallel hand position. So sometimes best thing to do is not to worry too much about the thumb when you're playing your folk guitar chords, and just let it do what it wants to do within reason. Now, when I say folk guitar chords, don't dismiss those as, oh, well, I don't play folk music, I'm not going to be playing those. Most of the music of Soar, Fernando Soar, Giuliani, Matteo Carcassi, Carulli, I mean, their early music, especially their easier music, is all based on your basic, what we call folk guitar chords or cowboy chords. That's what those early studies are based upon. So considerations of hand positioning for those chords is very important. That's your essential repertoire, the beginning repertoire, using a lot of C chords and G7 chords and G chords and A chords. And even in the more advanced music of Soar and Giuliani, constantly you're using the basic first position chords all the time. So that's an important consideration. And that thumb, you know, the old rule about, oh, don't ever let it go above the neck like that. Sometimes it will kind of creep up there for certain formations. That's okay. Now, you don't want to be hugging the neck like this, for sure, you know, that kind of thing. But again, my emphasis, my point is that thumb is not going to be like this as it was in the parallel hand position all the time. It is going to be changing position quite a bit. The parallel position is a good all-around position and is to play a bar chord, you have to be in the parallel position. If you're not in the parallel position, your bar will go slanted if you swing your hand out if you're not in the parallel position. So in classical guitar music, we do a lot of barring and then single notes, barring, single notes. So the parallel position works really well for passages combining bars with other formations because you can use the same hand position. You don't have to go from the parallel for the bar chord to a slanted, parallel, slanted, parallel, slanted. You can stay in that parallel position as much as possible. For slurs, pull-offs, the parallel position is far superior to the slanted position. Slanted position, you lose a lot of the power of your pull-off, especially with the little finger, because you're pulling off at an angle like this instead of pulling straight off the string like that. You get a lot more power, a lot more volume from your pull-off and clarity when you use the parallel position and pull off perpendicularly to the string, rather than pulling off at an angle this way with a slanted hand position. So both positions have their plus and minuses. Both positions are used, and when you're playing, it's a constant change. This is what's going on with your hand, because the music constantly changes, makes new demands on your hands. You're going to be going this way, you know, slanted, parallel, this on this axis, and then your elbow is going to be going in, you know, winged out, tucked in, winged out, tucked in. And it's also because of the thumb position, you're going to have play in your wrist this way, and when you have that, you have movement of the forearm coming in and out this way. So all of this is in play all the time when you're playing. You do not sit in one hand position all the time. It's always going to be changing. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned that teaching the parallel hand position, a default hand position like this, why it may not be a good idea to teach this position to a beginner. Playing in first position with a parallel hand position is difficult, even for intermediate guitarists. This is especially so if the player doesn't have long fingers or natural stretch between the fingers, or if the scale length of the guitar is a little long for the player's fingers. Most beginners are taught the notes on the strings in first position, and often beginning with the notes on the first string, the E, F, and the G, and usually using the third finger on the G. But trying to maintain a parallel hand position when going from the first finger at the first fret to the third finger at the third fret, for many beginners, that is really difficult to hold the hand in that position. And in their struggle to do that, a lot of times they end up with because there's so much tension in their hand, their little finger is, ends up being straightened down. It's really hard for them to control the little finger. Now it's interesting that 19th century guitarists such as Fernando Sor usually specified the fourth finger, the little finger, to be used at the third fret. And this allows the hand to be in a much more comfortable, less parallel position, not necessarily swinging way out. I mean, that's not good for the little finger to be swung out that far, but certainly you're no longer in the strict parallel position. You have a little leeway to swing out a little bit more so the hand is not under so much stress. This is much easier for a beginner to do. Now, one way around the problem is to teach a beginner with a capo at, on an upper fret, so that they're playing on frets that are closer together. So they could be playing, learning their E, F, and G here, where they have a much easier stretch between the first finger and the fourth finger, allowing them to play more comfortably in the stricter parallel position. But looking ahead, the beginner will soon be playing easy studies by Sor, Carulli, Carcassi, and those early studies use chords and formations that require the non-parallel hand position. It isn't until they begin playing past the first position and getting into bar chords that they really need the parallel position on a regular basis. But to play intermediate and advanced repertoire, the parallel position is a necessity, especially for playing passages, as I said earlier, with bar chords and slurs, especially descending slurs, pull-offs. So the argument could be made that it is a good idea to introduce the position to the beginner, to form good habits and develop stretch between the fingers, and not wait until later when it may be more difficult to teach a new position to someone who's already been playing for a year or more. Certainly something for teachers to ponder.